Good afternoon, guys and girls. Thanks for joining me this afternoon, or if it's morning for you, on today's webinar. And we are going to be looking at color editing and color grading in Capture One, of course. So a combination of using two very popular tools and some techniques, which I hope you can apply to your own photography. For those of you who are joining us on YouTube and Facebook, welcome. If you want to put a comment in, then that will come straight through to me. So if you do have a question, please don't be shy and go ahead and ask. If you are in our webinar room, then the easiest way to ask a question is to go to the Q&A tab, as that will go straight through to me or Diego, and it just separates it out from the main chat. Otherwise, it can be a little bit hard to follow. If you'd like a bit more real estate, you can hide that chat window and then Capture One will appear a little bigger. So that is the plan for today. So let's bring Capture One up on screen and take a look. So what we're going to do today is look at this tool, the color balance tool, which is a super awesome, very easy to use tool. We will also look at the color editor, basic and advanced, when to use one and the other. Two important distinctions there. And we'll also look at combining them with layers, how the actual mechanics of each tool works as well, which is what we're going to begin with the color balance tool. So let's collapse down our color editor, and we're going to bring up this very exciting picture of a grayscale and a gradient. And this relates quite closely to this color balance tool here. So first of all, I guess, what is color grading? That could be a very long discussion, but essentially color grading is putting some kind of creative color effect, tint, grade, those different terms are often used, onto your picture. And that could be to convey some kind of emotion, it could be to correct something, it could be just to give your own creative flair, all kinds of different reasons. Traditionally, color grading would be done with the curves tool, and there's no reason why you still can't do that. And we talk about some important differences between color balance and curves as well, and point you to some more resources on curves, because we won't talk about that so much today. So let's begin with our color balance tool. What does it actually do? So if we look at the tool down here, we have these three color wheels: shadows, midtones, and highlights, and we have a master color wheel like so. All of you can learn how to use this in a very short space of time, and it's really applicable to any kind of photography that you might be doing. So don't feel this is just for people. It really works for any discipline that you are involved in. So I've got some people-y shots here, but we'll look at a couple of different ones afterwards as well. So why have I got a grayscale picture up here? So this will show us really how the mechanics of the color balance tool works. So let's start with the master tool tab. So in the center there is a control point, which I can pick up with my mouse, and then I can drag it to any of the color zones indicated by the color wheel. And the further I drag it out, the stronger that color will be. And you can see it affects the whole photo. Imagine this is a photo, regardless of whether it's a shadow, midtone, or highlight. So it's essentially applying a tint. Let's bring up this shot to the whole picture. So if we wanted to warm this shot up a little bit, it helps if I'm on the background. If I wanted to warm this shot up a touch, I could decide to go over to the warmer tones and warm everything up. Easy. What about the three-way option down here? So let's bring back the grayscale, make sure I'm reset. And this is doing the same thing really as the master, except it is only affecting predefined ranges of shadows, midtones, and highlights. Now those predefined ranges you can't alter. We'll talk about a few different techniques you can do to actually help define your own ranges if you wish. But in the tool itself, in its basic sense, they are preset. So let's grab let's just throw the shadows down here. Let's pull up the midtone so you can see where the shadow starts and ends. You can see where the midtone starts and ends, and then highlights, let's do something different. You can see where the highlight starts and ends. So it's pre-programmed to only affect those tonal ranges. Adjacent to the color wheel is a slider which moves up and down, which either lightens that area or darkens that area. When we look at this on a photo, you'll see it's different to how shadow recovery works, or highlight recovery gives you a different look. So we'll have a look at that as well. But that's really all there is to it. It's very simple. These further tabs, shadow, midtones and highlights, they're simply bigger versions of that if you find it easier to work with a color wheel which is a bit bigger. Let's have a look in practical use. So going back to our man here, let's just reset that. So this has had a bit of editing. First of all, I think it was underexposed, so it's been brightened somewhat, and there's also a slight dodge just to lighten up this area here around the face. Otherwise, it's fairly unedited. So what we can do with the color balance tool here is, as I said, do we want to just warm up the whole shot? Do we want to cool it down? Do we want to make everything a bit, redder or whatever? The sky's the limit. So for me, if I wanted to pick up on the fact that there's sunlight dropping on his face, it's probably, we can always tell by the metadata, what time are we shooting? It's 8:30 in the morning, so the sun is low, so the sun potentially is a bit warmer. So it'd be nice if we can enhance that in the photo. So I could just drag this up to the warmer tones. Helps if I'm on the background, David. We'll talk about layers in a second, and warm up the shot like so. So a very simple, easy little color grade just to warm everything up a bit. What we might like to do is also grab some separation between shadows, midtones and highlights as we saw before. Now for this particular shot, I probably wouldn't, but if we start to examine this one, then I think this is where it gets a little bit more interesting. So if we look at this picture, again, it's had some default editing, so it's a little bit bright, so the exposure's been knocked down to some extent, a touch, and we've done play around with the high dynamic range, but very light editing in general. There's also a slight dodge, I think, again on his face, you can see there, which is just brightening up his face a tiny touch as well. Otherwise, it's fairly untouched. But in this kind of shot, there's a couple of things that would be nice to do. One, to, like we did in the first one, bring out the warmth of the environment to some extent. It's pretty obvious that this is either late in the day or early in the morning. So again, if we look at the metadata, we can see it was at, 7 o'clock in the morning. So low sun, big telltale by the fact that we can see the sun, but the color tones are going to be warmer and more pleasing and so on. So it might be nice to try and enhance that, but also have a bit of separation from the shadows as well. And it's all very subtle, but I think it will look good. Now, generally, the other thing that we can do is place our color grading on a separate layer. This is very nice to do because it means that we have a separate layer just with that adjustment. It doesn't get mixed in or confused with some of the basic edits that we might do. And it also gives us the ability to play around with the opacity to lessen the effect or strengthen the effect. So from this point on, we're going to do pretty much all of our color grading on a layer. So over here in our layers tool, we're going to start with a new filled adjustment layer. So if we tap this, that's going to make me a new layer. If I press M on my keyboard, or if you're not keen on shortcuts, you can find it up here. That's going to display our mask. So it's essentially going to affect the entire photo. So we do it this way first of all by just banging a whole adjustment on the picture or a color grade, and then we talk about how we could maybe manually change our tonal ranges a little bit. So first of all, let's open up a histogram as well. So we want to make maybe this area a little bit warmer, and this is sneaking into the midtones. If I hold my mouse cursor, we can see on the histogram roughly where we're looking at, so probably mid-tone. So if we go to the midtones and then pull this over in this direction, oh, before we do that, here's a trick. By default, your opacity will be set to 100. So it means whatever we do with our color grading, that's the strongest it will be, because I can't go beyond 100. I could reduce my color grading, but I couldn't maximize it. So before we do a color grade, let's just pull this back to 80%. And then when we apply our color grade, we could say, oh, let's make it a bit stronger, or let's make it a bit weaker. So let's start around, well, let's try 75, something like that. So backtrack, we're now on our midtones. Let's warm those up a little bit. And you'll see if I option click on the reset button, you can see before and after. So that's really improving the warmth of the sun. We've got a bit more good feeling going on. We know it's early morning, lovely warm tones, great. But this background is all merged into one to some extent. So if we zoom in, maybe not that close, I think this is a GFX 50, which is why the file is fairly big. GFX 100, okay, even bigger. All right, so let's go to the shadows, and then if we want to separate them out from the midtones a little bit, let's go in the opposite direction, and you'll see if I exaggerate, you can see in the midtones still nice and warm and falling off into the shadows. Now that's probably a bit too strong, but I'm going to leave it strong so you can see, if we do an option click, exactly where it's made that change. So it's all the way around the front in the shadows. And in reality, if I was standing where the photographer was, these areas, they've dropped out into the shadows, so they're not going to be as warm as the midtone. So if we can exaggerate that separation a little bit, then that can look quite pleasing. Now, I probably wouldn't go this strong. I'd actually back that off a little bit. So now if we turn our layer off and then back on, that's the difference. So I'm going to go further back and then just pull the darkness down a little bit to, or luminosity if you like, to exaggerate that contrast. So if we turn that layer off and back on, there we go. So it's subtle, but looks nice to me. You can argue against that, of course. Now the nice thing is, as we started at 75%, we could say, well, how does it look with less color grading? So that's with nothing. That was how we dialed it in. And then if we want a bit more, then we can go in this direction. So that gives you a little post-edit slider. If you then look at it 10 minutes later and think, oh, you know, I wish I'd made it a bit stronger. If we'd started off at 100, then what we would have had to do is, okay, we need to move this a little bit. We need to move that a little bit to get a greater strength. And certainly if you'd included some other adjustments into it, like if we decided to up the saturation a touch as well, then you've got a third element that you would have to fine tune as well. So start your opacity 75, 50, see what works for you. And then that way you can go in both directions, which is rather handy. So that's one method, and that's by using obviously these predefined ranges in shadows, midtones and highlights. So could we do something else? Yes. I'm just going to throw a little highlight in there as well. Before we do that, let's check how we're doing for questions. Jim says, if you have a linear gradient on a layer under the color grade layer, is it taken into account? Yeah, we could stick a linear gradient on top of that, but we're still going to see the color grading through that, depending what you put on the linear gradient, of course. If I then did the opposite of my color grade, it would cancel it out because the layer stack is just always collapsing, if you like, to show you the final result on screen. So it would wholly depend what's on your linear gradient, but by default, it would not cancel out any of that color grade. All right, so looking over here on the questions, I think Diego's answered a bunch. Is that you, Mr. Grover? Yes, it is. No, it's Diego answering questions on chat as well. I'd love to be able to talk and type at the same time, but not possible. Kevin was asking, is there a way to enhance the blue sky? Maybe, because I think on the original picture, if we just go to the background for a second, there's if you look at the sun, it's pretty much burning everything out. So we could enhance it a little bit, but to be honest, I would keep it relatively subtle. But when we look at the next photo, then yes, we'll look at how we can enhance the blue sky. So hold that thought. All right, let's turn that color grade off. and let's change it a little bit as well. So we're going to do the same thing. Let's make a new field adjustment layer, and we're going to call this partial mask, if you like, even though it's filled currently. And we do the same thing again. So let's set that to 75. Let's cool down our shadows somewhat, and let's pump a bit more warmth in the midtones. So we've got exactly the same result as we had before. Now, as we've got all of this area is seen as a shadow as well, then that color grade is going to be placed across everything. Because if I press M on my keyboard, then obviously the mask is covering the whole picture. But what if you wanted this section to remain a bit warmer? So we could easily do that just by punching a hole in the mask. So if I grab my erase brush and right click, I'll just make this nice and big and fully soft. And let's turn the flow down a bit. If you're not sure what flow does, flow is the rate at which the adjustment builds up or the masking builds up. So I'm erasing my filled mask. So with a flow of, let's make that even lower actually. So with a flow of 15 or whatever, every brush stroke is 15%. So that might even be too strong. Let's go down to something like that. So if I want to kill the color grading, which is in this area, I can just brush away like so. It's going to build up slowly. So at some point, if I want to leave a little bit in there, I can, or I can stop as I wish. So now if we turn this mask on and off, see most of the color grading is happening down in this corner. Again, if I want to make it stronger, I can do so, or weaker, I can go in that direction. What does the mask look like? If I press M on my keyboard, you can see we've punched a hole in this corner of the mask. If that was too much, we could bring our brush back in, nice low flow, and then I could paint a little bit more kind of around this area. So if the predefined zones, if you like, aren't doing it for you, that would be one way just to manually position where you want your color grading to pop up. Third way, let's turn this off. This might have varying amounts of success. It's going to depend very much on the image content. So let's say Luma mask or Luma measured. Hang on, let's do that. And then did I fill that mask? No, I didn't. If you forget to fill the mask, I did that on purpose, of course, you can right click and say fill mask, like so. So we've started exactly as we did before. We've got a filled mask on our shot. But what we can do is ask Capture One to limit the mask based on luminosity ranges. So we can say to Capture One, okay, out of all the mask on this picture, put an extra level of constraint on it and pull down the, or ignore the highlights and midtones and only show me the shadows, or vice versa, or just the midtones and so on. Now the easiest way to do this is to look at the mask represented by grayscale. So if we turn on grayscale, the photo gets hidden and now the mask is being shown to us via grayscale. So right now, as the mask is completely filled, it's showing as white. If we press this button up here, then we get this funny looking Luma range histogram, which allows us to restrict exactly what parts of the mask we want to see. So if I pull down the highlights, we're going to say cut out the highlights, cut out the midtones, cut out those 3/4 tones and only leave me with the shadows, like so. Now this is very binary and clunky, and probably if we put a color grade on it now, it's going to look weird because there's a lot of fine detail which we want to get rid of. So if we turn up our radius, this brings this slider's sensitivity into play. So with radius at 0, it doesn't matter what I do with this slider, nothing is going to change. So we need to define some kind of pixel radius first of all. If I bring the sensitivity down to 0, what it'll do is make that mask super soft and fluffy. And the bigger I bring up the radius, the softer and fluffier it gets. If we go in the other direction, then we get a super refined mask, which is great if you're trying to do some work in Capture One. But for something where we want a soft, unnoticeable effect, we want to go in the other direction. So what we've created now is a mask that just sits in the shadow areas. So if I turn my mask on and off, you can see where it's sitting. like so. And now we could do a similar thing. So if we do exactly the same that we did before, that's just another method, but you've really defined where that cutoff is. Now, if we want to, we can go back into the mask and we can pull that, you know, even further down, so it would just be the darkest areas, or we could, you know, if we open it up, then that's also going to affect, you know, more of the photo. So that's another way to just restrict that mask and place it where you want. So if we apply that and then we look at our color grade, so that was just over the whole shot. If we press M on the keyboard for this one, you can see the mask. So that's got our warm midtones, and then we've cooled down the shadows to pull some separation between midtones and shadows. Partial mask, we focused it more over here. And then Luma mask, we let Capture One decide, or we decided where we wanted to place the color grading. So in this case, it's just on those darker areas. So different ways you can pull that around. So if we wanted to have, you know, just the midtones and then change our grading as well, then we could do so. Okie dokie. I mean, personally, I would go for probably that one or that one, I would say. And then the fact that we've got our opacity slider, we can fine tune it to something that looks exactly what we were hoping for. All right. Let's have a quick check for questions. Is there any way to make layer opacity on new layers default to 80% instead of doing it manually? Brett was asking. No, there is not a way to do that. However, it's a popular request, so maybe your dreams will come true in the future. I've lobbied for that as well, because there could be loads of other use cases that could be interesting for that. So watch this space and let's see what happens. Yes, Tony, it seems that the color balance tool would be an effective split tone tool for black and white conversions. Well, what it actually becomes is a triple tone tool. So if we bring this one back and convert to black and white, like so, let's make a new field adjustment layer. What we essentially have now is the ability to pump all kinds of different stuff in the shadows, midtones and highlights. So the black and white tool will split tone down here. So you can see hue and saturation for highlights and shadows, but you don't get anything in the midtones. So there's no reason why you can't use the color balance tool on the black and white. It will still have an effect. Essentially the photo is in color anyway, so it's just a nice little extra bonus that you can use the color balance tool. So yeah, absolutely. Can you paint the mask? Carolyn is asking, like in Photoshop, so you just put it specifically. Yeah, we actually did that. Maybe you missed that part, but on this partial mask, if I just press M, so if we grab a brush over here, then let's right click and change that. So here's me brushing. If we change to eraser, then here's me taking away. So we can decide exactly where we want to put, in this example, our color grading, all of the picture, some of the picture, etc. Or it could be any other adjustment as well. So you can brush, you know, manually with a brush. You can use a magic brush, which will very, very quickly select similar areas for you. Gradient, radial, cloning and healing, or healing and cloning, eraser and magic eraser, which is the opposite of the magic brush. So yes, Carolyn, you can do that. Okay, let's move on to another little example. Shall we stick with this picture? I just want to talk about curves briefly, and what I'll do is when the recording is processed on YouTube and you're watching it, hello to those of you who are watching it not recorded, up here just in the corner of the screen I'll put a link into a webinar that I had with Zoe Noble, good friend of the house, and we've also got a video on our Videos We Like playlist by Dunna Did It, a popular YouTuber, which goes in depth into the curves as well. Now you can do a lot of exactly the same stuff. Let's turn that off and do another field adjustment layer, also with curves. So if we come and find the curves tool, and traditionally this is what you would have to do because there was no color balance tool in photographic applications. tons in video editing, but for some reason not in video applications, in still photo applications. So previously you would color grade using the curves. If you want to do that, that's fine. But just remember, if you're using the curve, you're also going to affect luminosity values. So you can't help that when you're putting a curve around, you're also making things brighter and darker. So in this case, what I can suggest is you use this handy preset called 5-point all channels, and this will give you 5 control points like so. So if I wanted to do the same thing in the shadows, I'll probably pull this one down a bit, and I might want to lock that as well. Then I can say, okay, I'm going to exaggerate, make my shadows colder or warmer. But keep in mind, these will have to be quite tiny inputs, otherwise very quickly it's not going to look very nice. So these inputs are going to be small, so if you need to make your curve tool bigger and drop it on a separate screen, then you can do so. Also, if you can't do that, then once you've selected a control point, if you use your cursor keys up and down, then you can move it in teeny tiny increments. So I can do pretty much a similar thing with the curves tool as I can with the color balance tool. But I would argue the color balance tool is a bit faster to use if you have less experience, and it decouples luminosity with the curve. So up to you. I personally tend to use the color balance tool because of speed and efficiency. Zoe, who you can watch on the video, which we will link to up there, tends to deviate to curves because she's more experienced than me, certainly with that tool, and also in Photoshop. And traditionally in Photoshop, you would use curves. So her brain is curves mode, mine is color balance mode, but both work equally well. But you can do some pretty sophisticated stuff with the curves tool. Get in there. There we go. Okay, next photo, and we talk about the basic color editor. And let's make sure the values are reset for this. Yeah, okay. So we've got 2 pictures here. It's had some basic edits, I think. Well, quite a lot more than basic edits. Let's go to this one. So it's a little bit brighter, and it's had the highlights toned down, but there's not a huge amount going on. In here, it's just your standard exposure, high dynamic range, and an auto levels, bit of clarity as well, but relatively untouched. What I don't like about this picture, and this is a whole philosophical argument about correct color, which we have in the office all the time. What is correct color? What is natural color? What is pleasing color? What is scientifically correct? All that kind of stuff. We could argue when Russell Ord in Australia took this picture, okay, it's represented everything perfectly. The sea is the right color, the sky is pretty good, the boat looks fine, the crates on the boat, that's all exactly as the human eye perceived it to be. Great. Just because the human eye perceived it like that, does it mean I want to represent it that way in my photograph? Yes or no, maybe not. So this way, whoops, wrong shortcut key. Command B to hide the browser, not Command D. Is this how I want to represent this picture if I was to edit it or Russell and then put it in a book, print it out or whatever? My answer would be no, because there's a few things that bothers me about this picture. One is going back to the previous person who asked, I can't remember, the sky. Can we enhance that? Yes, that would be great. Can we make the sea look a bit more appealing? Because it doesn't have that nice, clear, tealy sort of look. Looks a bit muddy and so on. And also what bothers me is these 2 crates on the side don't quite match the 2 crates on the top. Does that matter? Don't know. But it was something that when I look at this picture, one of the first things I thought was I'd really like to just tweak the color of those crates a little bit. So here comes in the color editor. Now we're going to look at the advanced as well, but basic, I'm trying to wean myself off the advanced color editor because a lot of the time it's simply not necessary to go advanced. The benefit of the advanced tab, which we look at, is that you get 2 more choices or 2 more things you can control. You can have very explicit control over the color range that you select and also the saturation range. Whereas on the basic color editor, it has predefined ranges, and whenever we adjust a color, we affect the entire saturation range of that chosen color. So if you think, oh, I'd love to edit a color, but I want to leave the lowest saturated tones alone, go advanced. Or if I want to edit a broad range of colors all in one go, go advanced. If you're happy with the predetermined ranges, stick with basic. So let's pick out those three things from this picture. So first of all, it was the sky. So you can either choose the color swatch that you think is the correct one, or you can grab our picker and say, I want to edit this color, and Capture One will pick that up for me. Now the hue slider is super easy to understand, even if you don't know what hue means. If you push it in this direction, you're going to push this color towards its neighbor. If we push it in this direction, you're going to push the selected color to its neighbor in this direction. So hue wise, it's probably fine. I might go that way a touch. I can make it more saturated and also darker. So now we've done a little tiny subtle edit onto the sky like so. And also the sliders indicate what's going to happen when you move them in that direction. So next thing, these crates that bother me for some strange reason, I'm going to grab that and click here. And now we're over in this direction. So I know if I push the slider this way, I'm going to move this towards the red. So let's zoom in a bit so we can see what's happening. I'm going to go this way, and then I'm going to darken them slightly. And now I feel there's a better alignment between here and here. And it's changed them on the roof a little bit, but not enough that I am especially bothered about. So now we've got those changes that are apparent as well. So let's do that. So small but very quick rapid change. Again, if we do option click on the reset button, you can see before and after like so. Okay, now we've got the sea, which looks a bit kind of meh. So if we click on the tone, it's going to go here. So now I want to push it more towards teal, I guess. So if we drag the hue in this direction and lighten it up a bit and take out some saturation, then we can clean up, for want of a better word, the water. So now the whole picture is a bit more in balance. My sky's a bit nicer. The crates, which mismatched a bit, look better. And now the sea is not quite so muddy. And that was all done using the basic color editor. So it's a really powerful tool and plenty powerful enough for the jobs you wanted to do now. Okay, let's look at a couple of questions. Is there a benefit to putting each adjustment of its own layer, saturation, color grade, shadows, color grade, highlights? I'd say yes, if you've got the time, Vernon. I think there would be an advantage that it would give you lots of control, because you could have different opacities for my shadows, highlights and midtones. That could be really nice. So I think if you're being really critical, there's absolutely no reason why you couldn't split it up over those layers. Like if I had 200 pictures to edit, you might get a bit tired of doing it. But if you had, you know, an editorial sequence that you were putting together and you wanted to match up, you know, 5 or 6 shots, then that could be really nice to have that control to be able to tweak things perfectly. Okay, what's the rainbow coded square at the end? That's the entire range. So if you want to do like a brutal amount of saturation, you can do so. So that changes that. And hue, it's a little bit hard to explain, but it essentially pushes the hue of all the colors towards its neighbors to the left or its neighbors to the right. So if I did this, so you can see now like the crates, they're getting pushed in this direction because I'm going left. You know, the blue sky will get made more teal, and so on. If I go in this direction, you should see these crates will get even more orange. Eventually, well, they're going to go green if we push it crazy amounts. What was our C coming up as? So C was this patch, wasn't it? So on this one, it's going to eventually go you know, here and then jump over to this one, depending how far we can push it on the hue slider. So is there a good use for that? I don't know. But it's there if you need it. And saturation, of course, will affect the entire saturation range. But it's a little bit more, what's the word, aggressive than using saturation in the exposure tool, because saturation in the exposure tool will limit its change on already saturated colors. So by pushing up, you know, saturation like so, anything that is sitting on the heavy end of the saturation scale will get less treatment than something that isn't. But this, you know, it works pretty nice. It actually does a okay job on this shot. Just use it with caution, really. So this whole photo would benefit from a little bit more saturation. All right. I love using lots of layers for control, but I shoot with a Phase 1 150. So I wonder how much size this affects of the photo. Well, you have to remember we're in a raw editor here. So when we add a layer, it doesn't actually make any difference to the raw photo. It actually makes your catalog grow in size a bit if you're using a catalog. So you have to build a .co mask, but it's not enormous, or your session, it will make it a little bit bigger. So there's no danger to the raw file getting bigger because we're not actually editing the raw file. We're just building a set of instructions. If you have tons of layers on a 150 megapixel camera, then you might see a performance impact. If that's something you're going to do regularly, then I would thoroughly recommend computer upgrade if you don't already have something that's super fast. Could we dehaze the water? JR Chip says, yeah, we could do. Let's just throw in a gradient mask. Option to change the gradient fall off, option drag. And then if we pull down dehaze or go up dehaze, let's see what happens. I personally wouldn't, because although I'm contradicting myself because I've changed the color of everything. But so if we add in a bit of dehaze like so, it would take that out. And also on this layer, I would brighten it a touch as well. So if we turn that layer off and on, we can dehaze it to some extent. But to be honest, I prefer the hazy look in this respect, even though I've, you know, completely changed the color of 3 items in the shot. No, my integrity would not let me dehaze the water. But yeah, dehaze tool would work nicely, or equally we could probably also chuck in a bit of clarity, might be less aggressive. So if we find clarity and pull that across and possibly pull in the levels a bit, that will also help dehaze it somewhat as well. I actually prefer that because it's not messing around with the saturation too much. All right, what's next on the agenda? I think we needed to look at the advanced color editor. How are we doing for time? Good. We should hopefully finish on time. Oh, good tip from Mike. Why not use the skin tone tool to balance the oranges? We could, but like in Capture One, there's 5 million ways to achieve the same end result a lot of the time. That's just one method. What Mike's suggesting is you can use the skin tone tool to normalize a range of colors. That also works. So if you're happy with doing that, that's great. I just saw a question pop up here. What are the nope, no, that's Diego's answer. What's the 3 dots by the rainbow box? This one. So when I spoke earlier, this is a good segue into the advanced color tab. Thank you, Simon, for that. So the basic ranges, so the ranges of each of these color patches have been preset by us. Now you can change them, but I personally would say if you want to do that, you may as well go advanced. So these are what the different color ranges are doing. So as I move around the different ranges, you can see what it affects on the boat itself, because everything else goes to monochrome like so. So we spent quite a bit of time deciding how these ranges should look. They are quite different from the old basic color editor, which this surpassed in Capture One 20, I think, or 21, I can't remember. So these have been fine-tuned to work pretty reliable on a whole range of different photography. So you shouldn't really need to play around with these ranges, but you can if you wish. But to be honest, if you think, this range isn't working for me, just go advanced. And that's what we're going to do next. So now we've got another nerdy graph here. And we're going to look at the Advanced tab. So the Advanced tab has no preset ranges. None whatsoever. So it's totally up to you to define the color range that you want to edit. And the only way you can do that is by beginning with picking a point on the photo itself. So we need our color picker down here. We're going to grab that and then we're going to say, I want to edit this color here, like so. Capture One will immediately give you a color range suggestion, and it is only a suggestion. And what's that showing me is this is the color range that I'm going to edit on the color wheel. Now it's very hard to visualize that, of course. So what we can do is turn on view selected color range. And this works on actual photos as well, not just graphs, tables. So now this shows us exactly the range that we're going to edit. So if I drag this out, you'll see the range will then move into the reds. If we go this way, we go greens, teals, blues, purples, reds, and so on. So you can have ultimate control over having a very narrow color range to edit or a very broad color range to edit. So the choice is up to you. So that's one benefit of the Advanced tab. The second benefit is the ability to control the saturation range. So if I want to cut out lower saturated colors, I can do so. Or more saturated colors, I can do so as well. So you get the ability to fine tune exactly the range that you want to have. Now, if I move this around, we can walk this guy all the way around the circle like so. Notice that, let's zoom in a bit on this one, maybe not that much, let's zoom out a bit more. Notice that, okay, the edge, if you like, the edge of my selection is soft, and there's a good reason for that, because it has a gentle roll off into the neighboring colors. So if it had a really hard edge, we'd end up with posterization and other, nasty stuff going on in the photo itself. So by default, this value smoothness is set to 20. So this gives us a nice roll off into the neighboring colors. Now, if I bring the smoothness down to 0, you see we get a very hard edge, and that's also represented on the color wheel itself. So that's a complete cutoff on your color range. So if we wanted to have like a super tiny selection, then we could do so. If I bring the smoothness up, it's going to roll off, smoothness down, it's going to be super tight, like so. So you've got a lot more flexibility in the color range that you're selecting, big or small, and the saturation range, big or small, and how it bleeds off into the neighboring areas. Generally, smoothness you kind of don't have to touch unless you're really going for that kind of microscopic color range selection. Otherwise, the default is generally pretty good for that. All right, let's look at an actual photo. Before we do that, let's reset that because that's giving away what we were talking about earlier. I think this shot has, very little editing on it. So pretty minimal adjustments. Let's take a look. We've got, just pulling down the highlights a touch, like so. So let's use the color editor to do something a little bit interesting here, and something that we would struggle to do a little bit with the basic color editor. So if I grab my picker, I'm going for, a color pick down here on the brick wall in front. So let's grab that. So that gives me a suggestion of my color range. Again, very hard to visualize. So let's turn on view selected color range. And very easily I can see, okay, we've got the paintwork on the wall. I've also got a bit in the building. But let's say I don't want the building. I'm going to squeeze that down a bit until we cut that out. Now, once you get to your picked color, we can't go beyond that. Because Capture One says, you idiot, that's the color you picked. Why would you want to go beyond your picked color? If you do, for whatever reason, you can actually pick up that point and just shuffle it out the way. Moving it around here doesn't have any effect on your final edit, so don't worry about that. So I can then adjust exactly how much I want. I could pull my smoothness down a touch, or I could make the smoothness bigger. Probably coming in this direction doesn't make any difference. But what I can do is limit the amount of color range selection I've got on this area. So let's turn off view selected color range. I'm going to pull that down a bit. Let's make this a bit more saturated. And we've done an edit at the front, so that's richer, bolder, a bit of separation from the background, which is always nice as well. Let's leave off view selected color range on, and now if we drag out that point, you can see the effect it's having. So we can fine tune without the need for looking at view selected color range, just by looking at the response of the picture like so. So that looks good to me. Now, if you find yourself fussing around trying to get, a really small color range on something and it's not working and you're getting frustrated, it might be or might make good sense to actually stick it on a layer and just do a really quick erase. So going back to, I can't remember whose question it was. Caroline, maybe. Let's put this on a layer because that could be a little bit more interesting. So let's reset what we've done there. We're going to make a new field adjustment layer. First of all, we're going to call that color edit. As a reminder, this mask is covering the whole shot, so everything we do is going to affect the whole shot. So I'm going to do the same again. Let's pick on my brickwork. Let's turn on view selected color range, and we're going to cut out the building to the best we can. Turn this back off. What did I do? I made it a bit darker and boosted the saturation. Now it is having a little bit of an effect over here and over that. Remember, this is on a layer like so. So what we could simply do is grab our eraser, right click, and then we can just erase that bit of the mask over here. Don't have to be particularly careful with it. In fact, I'm being really careless, and just punch away that bit of the mask. So that's what my mask looks like now. So we've got our color edit down here, nothing going on up the top. So if you find yourself that you're just getting frustrated with the advanced color tool, you can't quite get the selection you have, don't forget it works on a layer and it makes it instantly more powerful. Sometimes that's faster than fussing around with color ranges, but I tend to try and tune the color range as best I can. And then obviously if it fails, then I can go one step extra and do a little layer trick as well. All right. I like the mouse sounds, Chris said. It's not a mouse, it's my overhead camera on. It's this. So it's probably getting a little bit beat up, the Wacom. So when we're, brushing away like so, it can sound a little bit scratchy. Maybe I need a new nib. It's probably well and truly past its best. Right, how are we doing for time? So we got 10 minutes left. Yeah, we do have one more image edit to look at, one or two. Actually, I've lost, where's that picture gone? Oh, here it is. Okay, this is the one I was looking for. Let's start from scratch for this one, and we just have a quick check on questions. One has a good question actually. What's the best way to change a color? And someone else was asking that. So can you change a color in Capture One? Yes and no. You've got a couple of ways to do it. So let's use this one as an example. Okay, so we can do a couple of things. Let's make a new field layer and we'll call this change color. Color, like so. We're going to pick our famous crates once more. And then we're going to grab our hue and we're going to drag that in a direction. Then we're going to pick again and drag it some more, pick again, drag it some more, pick again, drag it some more, pick again, and keep going. And eventually we just wander our way around the color wheel. So that's one option. Okay, let's reset that. In our skin tone tab, we can do another thing, and I haven't tried this for a while, so I might get this totally wrong. But if we expand this to make an almost circle, like so, So that's my picked color. Am I going to get this right? And then if we change move this over here and pull the hue across, then we can actually change color to anything that we want. Now I would use a mask to restrict it down, but by moving this point around in any particular spot, we can make the color of something whatever we like. But I would obviously mask out the areas that I wanted to do that dramatic color change, because otherwise it will affect the whole picture. What this tool is essentially doing, the skin tone tab, it's used for skin tone. This is a slightly wacky way to use it, but what you're asking this tool to do is anything in this selection, so anything in this selection, change the picked color to the one that I've dragged it to. So actually by narrowing this selection down, we've got the ability to change the color of the crates to anything in this particular range. So, which is kind of cool, really. So there is that way to do it. So you've got two choices, both a little bit clunky, but it is possible. All right, let's go back to that editing example, and that will finish us off. So shot from Diego, thanks Diego. We are going to fix the keystone first of all, because Diego didn't line himself up properly, and we're going to say auto, and that will just fix our perspective. We could do four-way actually, so this is a doorway, and say auto. There we go, even nicer fix, which is good. Editing wise, it's fine, good exposure, good everything else. Let's open up the shadows a touch, maybe a bit more brightness, a bit more shadows and so on, because I'd like to see a bit more what's going on in the restaurant. But to me, I now find this door is a bit on the bright side. Is it a little bit distracting because our focal point is here? We can improve that more in a second, but this part, as it's directly in the sun, is now bothering me ever so slightly. So if we go to our advanced color editor and we do our pick, I'm going to go for the door frame up here, turn on view selected color range and see what we've got. Now we've got a little bit of, you know, everything going on. So we want to try and cut that down, which is easy to do with this part. Here's probably not going to make much difference. And now if we cut out the lower saturated colors, I just want to make sure we've got the door frame well selected as possible. Now I can't really get rid of the door here. So even if I bring the smoothness down, it works, but I'm losing also a little bit my door frame. So I'm kind of at the limit of what I can do with selection, but I can get close to it. So what I would do is make our new field adjustment layer. Start again, grab the pick, turn on view selected color range, squeeze it down from over here because I don't want to have to mask anything like as complex as that, and then pull down the saturation range a bit till I'm somewhere around here. So that looks pretty good. So I'm going to turn off my view selected color range and simply using the lightness slider, nothing else, I want to darken down this door like so. So you see as I drag that slider, that's just going to take the edge off it a bit. Make sure I haven't... Oh, I'm in the skin tone tab. David. That was, whose fault was that for asking about colors? So now we're in the proper tab. I thought, well, that's not having enough change because the skin tone tab, these adjustments, hue, saturation and lightness, they're at a lower range than the advanced tab because again, it's designed for skin tone. So it'll have a more subtle effect. So let's try that again. So I've picked on there, view selected color range. Let's pull that down from as much as the background as possible, making sure we don't lose the door. Great. And now I can pull my lightness slider down to make that door a bit darker. And because I don't want it to affect the background, we're going to grab our eraser and we're just going to knock that out so it doesn't get too dark. Like so. And to finish off, I'm going to grab a style brush while we're here, which is called Dodge or Brighten. Zoom in a little bit, make this brush a bit smaller, and then just brighten up what's going on in the background a little bit, like so. So that's just brightened up these areas so we can see these gents having their nice lunch. Perfect. If we turn our adjustment layer 1 off, you see it's just taking down that harshness I feel of the door where the sun's bouncing off it. Otherwise I find I'm distracted by it, and then doing the opposite with that, opening it up. So whereas before you're going to get distracted by that bright door and not see into the restaurant, kind of flip that around as well. All right, let's see. Let's just check in. Have we ever had a full-day paid Capture One workshop training session at studio or other location? Our resellers certainly do. There's only one of me, so I could probably spend 200 days a year just traveling around all the place and doing courses, which I used to a long time ago. Wasn't very good for health or weight gain, that's for sure. But ask your local resellers what Capture One courses they're doing. You might find they are doing something. Is Capture One overkill for my camera? No, not at all. Canon M50, it's a great camera actually. Is it overkill? Definitely not. If it's your hobby and you enjoy editing pictures, then spend the money on what, puts a smile on your face. So if you get, great results, good control, nice photos, better photos, then yeah, absolutely go for it. A hack for sure, but cool nonetheless. Yeah, it is a bit hacky, but it is definitely possible. Let's see. Will the split tone tool come to edit colored photos in the future? The actual split tone tool in the black and white photo is tool is only for black and white. There's no reason why you couldn't use the color balance tool though. That's kind of pushing a color into those zones, which is what the split tone tool is doing. All right, that's a good. Alex, when can we have a more aggressive purple fringing correction? Any requests that you've got like that, if you go to support.captureone.com, submit a request in the top right hand corner, that will take you to a page with some helpful answers and so on. You can scroll right to the bottom and then you'll find a section where you can make a support case, and one of the options is submit a request. So do that. If you've got a request, we'd love to hear about them. Most of the new changes in Capture One in the past couple of years have been directly from customer requests. So log the requests in. The more people do it, the better we know what you want. So I would always go for that. Let's see. Last couple of questions. Could you work on a portrait picture quickly before we're done? Chris was asking. Chris, there's actually a portrait webinar coming up, and then you can have a whole hour of portrait editing. So that will be, I can't remember the date, sorry, because I've just planned it. But look out on our Learning Hub and YouTube, because you'll see the placeholder for it, but it will be coming up in October or November. I can't remember which date I put it in. So Chris, keep an eye out for that. I mean, the best way to know what's happening is to subscribe. Let's put up our lovely animation. Subscribe, and also click the reminder on our YouTube channel, and then you'll always be notified when we go live, when new stuff goes up and so on. So I would do that, Chris. So sorry we didn't get to that one. Abbott said, at this point, could you use the magic eraser to remove the door jamb? You could, to be honest, but it was so fast to just grab the eraser and knock that out, because we don't have to be accurate. The magic brush and magic eraser are great when you want accuracy. If you don't need accuracy, there's no benefit to using them. So in a situation where I would want to quickly, if I've got the photo I am thinking of, in a situation where you would quickly want to select the sky of something, so like this, let's just turn that off. So if I make a new layer, grab the magic brush, make sure my mask is on, don't know what my adjustments are, but let's see. So if I quickly wanted to select a sky, in this example, I would use a magic brush, because to do that manually would be painful. But in the situation where we just wanted to very quickly get rid of that bit, I don't have to be accurate, because none of this is in my color range selection anyway. So there's no point being accurate. This is just a quick, yeah, let's get rid of that. So again, depends what uses. Is this being recorded, Roland? Yes, so it's going straight to YouTube. So if you want to rewind and watch it all again, just go to our YouTube channel and you can watch it later. What I will do tomorrow is add some chapters, so it's easier to search through it, add a couple of links to other resources that I mentioned, but that won't happen till tomorrow sometime. Boys got to eat. Last question. I think we are pretty good. Could we colorize the grey paint on the right? That would be hard actually, because the color editor tool relies on having some kind of color pick to then manipulate. So something over here like this, which is grey, we don't have any color information to transform it, if that makes sense. So you couldn't turn that into something else. You could try and clone a bit in if you wanted to, but you wouldn't be able to paint it in. Plus it's authentic. It's authentic. Otherwise, I think we are good to go. Oh, good one from Vernon. If I start adjusting on the background and realise it would be better on a layer, is there a way to jump my edits to a layer? There is, but it's not very efficient. What you could do is you could save a style. Like if you've done a lot of work, this would actually be efficient. You could go to your styles and presets, you could save a custom style, make sure what's ticked on is useful for that particular style. So let's say these things is the stuff I've done. Maybe there's a color editor in there as well. Save that. Let's just call it jump to layer. And then now under my custom styles, jump to layer, I could right click and say apply to new layer. So if you've done a load of stuff on the background and go, I wish I'd put this on a layer, you could do those couple of steps. So now if I say apply to new layer, what I end up with is my adjustments here like so. So you make the call actually, Vernon. If you think it's faster to do that than trying to recreate everything, then that would be more efficient. If you've just done one color pick or something like that, probably not worth it, but that would be a way to do it. Great. Well, thanks everybody for joining this afternoon. I hope that was useful for you. Find the recording tomorrow and I'll enhance it as I said. Next week at some point, we'll be talking about this guy because we've got some new updates coming to that. So next week on Thursday, then we'll talk about what's happening with the iPad. So if iPad is your jam, then join me for a session next Thursday as well. Otherwise, don't forget to subscribe, very important, and we will see you all in the future. So enjoy your weekend when it comes and take care. Bye now.